Thank you for joining us for SEARAC's October Community Call, and our focus today is the Southeast Asian American Solidarity Toolkit launch. And so we're going to hang on for a couple of minutes and as people are joining on the call, and then we will get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining SEARAC's October Community Call. We are going to get started in about 1 minute, and we're so excited because today we are going to be launching the Southeast Asian American Solidarity Toolkit and share information from the collaborators about how this toolkit came to be and how it can really help support our communities. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining SEARAC, along with the National Immigration Project of the National Lawyers Guild, the James M. Bender Center for New Americans, and the Release Minnesota 8 campaign, as we are sharing today the Southeast Asian Solidarity Toolkit, a guide to resisting deportations and detentions from the Release Minnesota 8 campaign. We're so excited you're joining us this afternoon, and we're so excited about the content that we have to share. And so we wanted to just let you guys know that this resource was truly a labor of love that was created by and for families directly impacted by our unjust immigration system. And we really hope this is a helpful guide for the Southeast Asian American community at a time when our detentions and deportations are really ramping up across the country. And so I just want to do some quick intros. My name is Monica Spade. I'm the field director for SEARAC, and I'm going to moderate this conversation. And I have Alyssa Talabot, our training manager, who is going to help with technical assistance. And I'm really stepping in for Katrina, who is our national policy director, and she couldn't be here today, but she's been very instrumental in supporting this work and helping this toolkit come to be. And so I'd also like to really introduce you to our amazing panelists who really helped in co-writing this toolkit. So first we have Linus Chan. He's a professor with the University of Minnesota Law School. He was the lead attorney for the Release Minnesota 8 campaign and represented Ched Nin, one of the 8 men detained and eventually given deportation relief. And next we have Jenny Srey, who is one of the original lead organizers for Release Minnesota 8, and her husband was Ched, who was detained for deportation in Cambodia in August of 2016. And after winning that case, Ched's deportation relief, she and her husband continue to be engaged in the fight to really fight against these unjust deportations by supporting other local families in Minnesota who are also impacted. And lastly, we have Julie Mayo, who is a staff attorney at the National Immigration Project of the National Lawyer Guild, and also a SEARAC board member. And so Julie was another lead consultant for the Release Minnesota 8 families and for SEARAC. And her guidance around legal strategies was invaluable as we were supporting these campaigns and getting the wins that we saw. And so we are so proud as SEARAC to have worked with these individuals. They have so helped numerous people, numerous organizations supporting that effort and fighting for action. And so before we move on, I'm just gonna, before we really get into our call, I wanna talk a little bit about logistics, just to remind everyone that you're gonna be placed on mute, and if you wanna make a comment or question, you need to be logged into the webinar. You don't have to wait till the end to populate your comments or questions in the question box that's circled there in pink. You can ask them throughout the webinar, and at the end we'll have a Q&A section where we can address your comments and hear your questions. And so we will also have resources. Don't forget to download the resources that we have that are also attached to this webinar. And if you want to watch any of SEARAC's webinars or community calls from the past, you can certainly do that as well. And so if you want to reach out to myself, Monica at SEARAC.org, and if you're interested, I can make sure we connect you with those webinars. And so let's talk about our agenda. So today we're going to be talking about the campaign. We're going to do a toolkit overview of the Release Minnesota campaign and the resources they created. We're going to hear lessons learned from the Release Minnesota 8. And so Jenny's going to be sharing around those tips about getting the campaign started, community organizing and the advocacy that they did, including advice around political engagement, trauma-informed therapy, and self-care to sustain during campaign organizing. Then we're going to move into legal strategy, where Julie and Linus are going to really tag team and talk about their role in the community and how they work with these campaigns, and including tips around how to select an attorney and preparing yourself to use legal counsel in your fight. And finally, we'll have Q&A, as I mentioned, with our audience, and any specific questions that you have that either Jenny, Linus, or Julie can answer. We're going to take those questions at the end. And then we're going to just tell you how you can stay engaged and take action to continue to support the movement to end unjust deportations. And as always, in SEARAC fashion, you know we love polls. So we want to know, where are you joining us from today? Is it Northeast, Southwest, or the Midwest? And we'll keep this open for like 10 seconds or so and see where people are joining us from. All right, let's see what we have here. Okay, the West and Northeast, pretty close. 36% of people on the call today are from the West, 33% from the Northeast, I'm sorry, then the Midwest and South and other. Oh, I'd love to know where other is. But yeah, so thank you guys for joining us from all around this country. It's amazing. All right. Technical assistance, we're working on that. So our next question is, what is your affiliation or purpose for being on the call? Are you a community advocate or organizer? Do you know someone directly impacted? Are you directly impacted? Are you an attorney or legal advocate? Or, you know, is there another reason that you want to join this call? Maybe you just want to be more informed about deportations and detentions to see what you can do. So we'll keep this open for a few seconds as well. All right, let's see what we have here. Okay, it looks like, wow, 56% of the people on the call are community organizers or advocates. Amazing, that's wonderful. 6% are directly impacted. I'm sorry, 3% are directly impacted, and 6% it's a directly impacted family member, and then another 17% are attorneys or advocates, and then we have the other categories. This is amazing. Thank you so much for answering this poll. It gives us a lot of insight into who's on the call and the kind of resources we may need to communicate or to share in the future. Okay, so we're going to get started. Oh, one more poll question before we get started. Have you heard of the Release Minnesota 8 campaign? This is a really easy yes or no, or not sure. A couple more seconds and then we'll see what we have. So it looks like, wow, 57% of you on the call have heard of the Release Minnesota 8 campaign, and welcome to the 34% who have not heard of the Release Minnesota 8 campaign. I'm so glad you're joining us. And so for the 9% as well who are not sure, hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll be familiar with this campaign and the work that the people who've been involved in this have been doing and how it can really help you, your family and or your community. Right. Okay, so I'm going to give a quick overview of the campaign, and then we're going to really move into hearing from the speakers that we have on our call, and I'm really excited about, because that's really the main part, the meat of the call that we're here for, is to hear from them. So in August of 2016, the families and supporters of 8 Cambodian American men in Minnesota, collectively known as the Minnesota 8, decided to organize a campaign to fight the sudden detention and orders of deportation for their loved ones. And so the Minnesota 8 campaign wanted the men all in their 30s and 40s to return to the communities where they had faced and overcome countless difficulties. So they also sought to inspire others to join the movement to restore human rights to refugees and to all immigrants. The Release Minnesota 8 campaign went public in September of 2016, and the determination and commitment of this campaign, their families and supporters, led to the eventual release of 3 of the 8 men. That is a huge, amazing win, especially in this climate. This campaign inspired hope for so many Southeast Asian American families across the country, and dare I say even other immigrant families across this country, that were impacted by our unjust immigration and detention system. It captured national media attention and support of lawmakers throughout the country. And it was a really pivotal campaign that educated so many and inspired people to action. And so as we look at this toolkit overview, the campaign came together under President Obama's last term, just as the Trump administration was coming into power. And so in the last year, we've seen the biggest mass roundup of the Vietnamese and Cambodian immigrants for removals from the United States. And we've also seen the U.S. aggression against the countries of Laos and Cambodia through their issuance of visa sanctions as a tool to threaten them to accept more deportees back. And so this has led a lot of families to seek resources and tools on how to organize and fight for their loved ones, for themselves. And this is where the inspiration for this project came in. It was really born out of a need that a family had and the need to really help others. And so the Southeast Asian American Solidarity Toolkit, a guide to resisting deportations and detentions from the Release Minnesota 8 campaign, is a great resource for individuals, families, and advocates in the Southeast Asian American community who want to learn how to organize a dynamic campaign to fight detention and deportation. And this resource really shares valuable insight and information for service providers, for researchers, policymakers, on challenges that families face around this punitive and mandatory criminal deportation law that we have. And it's really not a prescriptive toolkit, but rather it's just successes and tools and resources that you can use that the campaign put together to help steer and inform similar efforts. And so overall, the toolkit's intent is to strengthen communities as they continue to rally for immigrant justice. And so now I would like to turn it over to Jenny of the Release Minnesota 8 campaign to kick us off by sharing tools and tips for individuals who are starting a campaign, and followed by the guidance around advocacy and organizing. So
Hi,
Jenny.
everyone. Yeah. Hi. Thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar. And yeah, as Monica said, we are Release Minnesota 8, which is a campaign that started from myself and 7 other family members to try and get their loved ones released from detention. And so the idea for this toolkit came about a few months after the last member of the Minnesota 8 was released. And so it was almost about a year ago. And it came about because other individuals with removal orders and their families started connecting with us and asking us what we had done and asking for help. So as a group, we began talking and realized that there might be this need for a toolkit or a guide. And so we talk about a lot of things in this toolkit. And so we compare it to other toolkits, and it's a little bit more wordy than you're used to. That's why we call it a guide, sort of kind of the steps that we walked through in creating this campaign. So, and so one of the first things we did, it says, if we could go back, sorry, to the next one. It says education and self-empowerment, legal options. One of the first things we did was reach out to folks. And I think we had this Facebook page. So it's amazing how Facebook is, right? But we had this Facebook page just asking for people to help. And I realized looking at this page that it had 50 shares. And so as we're reaching out to people to help us, people started reaching back out to us in response to this post and saying, hey, this is where I can help. How do you need help? And so we started off by learning a lot about what we were up against. You know, one of the things we needed to learn was how can people get released? Linus is also on this call. He was one of the first people that we met with who talked to us about legal options and who had power and how do we get somebody released legally. So it was important to educate ourselves, figure out what legal options we had, and then, you know, map out who has the power to make these decisions. So we can go. And then from there, once we knew all that information, we worked together to start building this campaign. Sorry, I'm looking. So we say lessons learned. Just so we as family members got together, learned a lot of information. We're in crisis, so a lot of these things that we put in the toolkit we didn't do right away, and so we made sure to add them just because, you know, looking back, had we known about some of this stuff, we would have done things a little bit more sooner. So in this portion, we focused a lot on just giving information that maybe we didn't do right away, but we wanted to make sure people knew that these were important steps to do. So that's especially important in setting your activism into motion. Another thing we can talk about is the outreach. So Release Minnesota 8 was really fortunate to have a lot of Minnesota artists help us with our campaign, which really helped amplify our message. And so we had a lot of artists just willing to help with some of their skills like photography, visual art, video making. We even had somebody come and help us make an ice monster puppet, which really helped one of our rallies get a lot of visibility. And then of course the last one, which was probably the most important, is trauma therapy and self-care. I don't think as a campaign we did it enough, but it's really important to have people who are focused in that area to kind of center and ground and make sure that the people impacted are constantly checking in and taking care of themselves. And so the next piece we talk about is political action. This is where the power mapping is important. And this is a part of the campaign that I feel like takes a lot of energy. And the lawmakers, they have a lot of influence and can help with, getting information and making decisions that not only impact our families, but impact the community. So this is a really important piece to prepare for. And it's really hard. And so having, other folks like SEARAC, Julie, we worked a lot with other local organizations and other national organizations, like Mi Gente, Navigate Minnesota, Black Lives Matter, Coalition for Asian American Leaders, a bunch of different organizations that really helped us be prepared for these meetings. And one of the things that we learned from Julie Mao, who's also on this call, is that it's no until it's a yes. And that's one of the things that really helps us continue to keep going. Whether you're talking to a political member, a community member, or a person of influence, that phrase can be really helpful because there's a lot of no's that we got. And there's a lot of people that you just think that don't care. But there's ways to get people to care, and they might not care right away, or there's ways to get them to do something that will help you. And they might not feel that it's important to do it right away. And so continuing to push, continue to be creative and find other ways to get a yes was really important. So, oh, I can't hear you. We can't hear.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jenny, for sharing your wisdom with everyone on the call and really your courage to continue to fight and fighting for other communities as well. And we're so inspired by the work that you've been doing and continue to do. And so, we always wish you the best here at SEARAC, that, as you're continuing this fight, that the tools and resources that you need will continue to come and will really continue to benefit the Southeast Asian American community. And so with that, we'd like to invite you to take another short poll question before we transition over to Linus and Julie to talk us through the legal strategies and that component of the toolkit. And so what would you find most challenging about organizing a campaign? And we give you several options. Is it talking to lawmakers? Is that a challenge for you? Is it a challenge to really get the community involved and educated around this? Raising money, talking to the media, or all of it? For some of you, it may be all of the above. And so what would you find most challenging? All right, what do we have? Let's see. Talking to lawmakers is 13%, but actually getting the community involved is the highest. And that sometimes can be a real challenge. I think Jenny talked about, what they had to do to make that happen. And then raising money and all of the above were neck and neck at 25%. So thank you so much for answering that quick poll. And hopefully as you look through the toolkit, you'll get some of that information.
Hey, y'all, can y'all hear me?
Yes, yes. And now we're going to turn over to you, Julie and Linus, for the legal strategies. Go for it.
All right, thanks. So y'all, I am Julie Mao. Good afternoon and good lunchtime for folks on the West Coast. So Linus and I are going to be tag teaming on the legal strategy section, and I will just note that we're going to do a very shallow dive into this and really encourage folks to turn to page 15 of the toolkit for some of the more in-depth conversation and explanation on this, because we really feel that since this is primarily organizers, directly impacted people and families, really understanding the organizing side of this work is super important. And we wanted to just leave folks with some of the larger infrastructure and tips on legal strategies. So I wrote down basically 3 main points and then some key places in the toolkit to dive in. The first sort of big tip from us is that it's super important for directly impacted people and families to understand, at least generally, the legal strategy. We can't depend on the lawyers by themselves to carry out the legal strategy. Folks have to understand it in order for it to be the best strategy possible. And so knowing and being empowered enough to understand the legal strategy is super, super important. So what Jenny said about, when folks calling lawyers and calling organizers into a space to help train them on what's going on, what's the deportation system, what's the process of legal relief, that's a super important step. And I think a lot of folks, when someone's detained, feel incredibly powerless and sort of unable to demand that level of clarity and knowledge. So I think number one, it's super important to ask and to understand what exactly the legal strategy is to stop a person's deportation. I think the next point I want to make is the importance of community solidarity and organizing. Oftentimes we think that the lawyer is sort of the only savior, the only mechanism to save or stop somebody's deportation, but it's actually really a community effort. And certainly under this administration, we need all the resources and tools and strategies that we can get to free our people. So what does community solidarity look like? It means coordinating with community groups, extended family, networks, to show support for that detained person. So examples are writing letters of support to support that person's bond hearing or immigration court hearing, raising money. Y'all have already talked about how difficult it is for a particular person to raise thousands of dollars. But when a community marshals its resources, there's different possibilities. Court witnesses, right? Individuals who can testify about someone's moral character in court. The ability to marshal political support. When we talk about no from a politician and then suddenly yes, that's because many people called that politician to demand and ask that that politician step in. And certainly in the MN8 case, I would say there were hundreds, if not thousands of calls, right, to politicians to ask them to do the right thing. So why does this all matter? It matters both because in immigration court cases, a lot of the types of relief that are involved are discretionary and very dependent on, the showing that this person is now a person of good moral character, or showing that the person's deportation will harm people who they're related to in the United States. And so having people come to the immigration court hearing, write letters, be able to testify strongly to the character of individuals is incredibly critical. And I can't tell you enough how many judges themselves have said that as a really critical point. The other thing is many of the legal strategies that, such as a motion to reopen, which I'm about to go into, they depend oftentimes on what can be done with a prior criminal conviction. And oftentimes that process of reopening and changing the criminal conviction is discretionary and involves local prosecutors, judges, and elected officials. And so having community support, urging those individuals and actors to do the right thing and reopen somebody's criminal case to avoid deportation is also incredibly helpful. So taking a step back and thinking about some key examples of legal options, I wanted to touch upon two key ones. What is a motion to reopen, and what is post-conviction relief? So the audience that these types of mechanisms generally applies to is folks with prior orders of removal, which often is the Southeast Asian community, but folks in many of the Arab communities, Middle East communities, and certainly African community diaspora also have a lot of folks who have final orders, maybe were formerly refugees or lawful permanent residents, had criminal convictions that then made them deportable, and the immigration judge ordered them deported. And because of the laws around sending individuals back to their home country, have been released released from detention, and have been doing years and years of what's called supervision or ICE check-ins. And so, these are kind of the folks where motions to reopen most applies to. So these are folks with prior orders of removal, oftentimes people who were lawful permanent residents or had some form of status and have oftentimes criminal convictions that made them deportable. And so a motion to reopen is basically to reopen that deportation order, right? The person might have been picked up when they did their ICE check-in or picked up at their home. They have this deportation order, and the idea to stop that deportation is to reopen the order so that person isn't deportable. And so the two main ways to do that we go into in the toolkit is new facts that might have arisen or changes in law. So new facts could be things like you have new family members who are U.S. citizens where you can get new relief, a criminal conviction that's been overturned, so you're no longer deportable, and perhaps a fear of returning to your country of origin now because things have gotten so bad. New law could be, there's been a change in law that makes whatever that crime was, 10, 15 years ago, that no longer is a deportable crime. So those are various examples of what you could argue to the judge on why your motion should be reopened and why you should no longer be deported. The other point is what's called post-conviction relief. So this is a type of relief that is sought at the local criminal court setting, not an immigration court, but from whatever criminal court produced the criminal conviction. And so it's about changing the actual criminal conviction so that you're no longer able to be deported by it. So it's about filing what's called a motion for post-conviction relief, and really being here, being able to talk to the prosecutor, show rehabilitation, and I think a lot of that community engagement comes into play again. The other piece that is also interesting to mention is pardons. So the governor can, if it's a state conviction, can pardon that conviction, and that also avoids deportation. In certain states and governors, there's various campaigns that people can run to ask that governor pardon the conviction so that the individual would avoid deportation. So I'm going to leave that there because I feel like that's already some meaty legal advice, and just point to the fact that the toolkit, if y'all didn't understand any of that, that is totally fine and understandable. The toolkit goes into explaining each one of those points, has deeper dives, answers some frequently asked questions such as, prolonged detention or, the possibility of immediate deportation. How do you stop that? And includes sample templates. So I'll leave it there and hand it off to Linus to talk about some of the real meaty tips around lawyer communication and relationship building.
Hi, everyone. So thank you for having me, and I'm really excited for a chance to be on any panel with Jenny. It's really one of a unique pleasure to be able to work with someone after having had that relationship of being a lawyer and a client. It's really great to be able to do that here. So thank you, everyone. So I'm going to go into a couple of things to essentially how to prepare folks on meeting with and deciding on what lawyer to get. As Julie has sort of already kind of outlined, the law here in this area is confusing, technical, and will feel unjust, and is unjust, right? I mean, this is the whole point of this conversation of how unjust this whole process has been, continues to be, and what we can try to do family by family to try to change those results. So one thing that is very important for everyone to understand is things will seem very difficult. People will likely not give answers that make a whole lot of sense, but it is very important to keep a few things in mind when it comes to meeting with and choosing a lawyer. First thing first, one, a lawyer is not a mechanic. The lawyer is not the person that you can go ahead, wrap up a case, have that person figure out what the keys are, and then they come back and give you a key that will prevent you from being deported or free you from immigration detention. This is really important because I think it's something that gets lost on both lawyers and clients. Really, the best situation that you can hope for, the ones in which you're most likely to have success, is if the client and the lawyer really feel like they're in a partnership. It's really important for the client or for the family member to understand what's happening and to be able to feel like they can discuss what they want to happen and to be able to get a straightforward answer from the lawyer about whether or not certain things will be able to happen or not. So that's number one. Communication with a lawyer is extremely important, and the feeling that the lawyer is making that person feel involved and as part of the process as much as possible is also important. All right. So aside from the touchy-feely stuff, let's talk about what do you need to do when you are getting ready to meet with a lawyer, to talk about your case, to convince that lawyer, to decide whether or not you want to hire that lawyer. First thing you need to do is try to understand the facts and history of either yourself or your family member's situation. It means looking for and digging up old documents, and it means asking questions that you may not have asked in the past. You may never have asked your husband or your wife or your father or your mother exactly the details of how they came to the United States, where they were before they came, and importantly, why they came. Those are some things in my experience where a lot of former refugees and even non-former refugees, but just immigrants, do not necessarily talk quite a bit about why they came, what happened, or the circumstances of their arrival. But it is important before talking to a lawyer to do that, to get as much information as you can about your history, including your immigration history. Then it's also important to get details. While it might seem odd, things like the difference between 1 month and another month can have a huge impact on an immigration case. For instance, whether or not you were born before April 30th, before you turned 18, before April 30th of 2000, or after April 30th of 2000, can mean the difference of becoming a citizen or not. So some of those really small details matter, and it's important about getting those details right and trying to find documentation of those details. Particularly when it comes to people who've been ordered removed in the past, it's important to get this type of information ready. 1, where was the person ordered removed? What city and what court? Did it happen in Chicago? Did it happen here in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, or did it happen in California? It doesn't matter where that person lives now. What matters is, where did that removal order issue from? Second, it's important to know what dates those occurred. Like, for instance, did the order of removal happen 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or longer? Those are all really important in deciding on what a good legal strategy might be. Criminal history. This one is key. A couple of things I want to point out about criminal history. So the way that a state describes a crime, whether it's a misdemeanor, a felony, or whether or not whether they can explain to a person that this crime is not that serious or they didn't have to serve that much time, all of those usually can be very misleading when it comes to its importance in immigration proceedings. So for instance, and I'll give you one very important example, a person might say, you know what, I only was in jail for a couple weeks for a particular crime. I didn't really have to serve any time in jail. They let me out as soon as I pled guilty. In those situations, the lawyer might be asking, well, what was your sentence? And your sentence is not necessarily tied to how long you actually spent behind bars. So that's why one reason it's really important to try to get complete, accurate details on what happened at the sentencing hearing and whether or not you have documentation on that. Some of the places to go for that could be the criminal court that a person was convicted of in the past. If you had a public defender, to go back to the public defender and see if you can get those documentation, or to get any documentation that can show exactly what happened in your criminal case. Family history is important, including whether your parents, whether they ever became citizens, how the family members came over, what children you have. And then, as Julie mentioned earlier, because these cases usually depend on something called discretion, and another word, discretion, really is how much the judge or how much the prosecutor wants to help you, right? Whether they think helping you is a good thing, whether they think you are an upstanding person or there's good reason for you to stay in the United States. Well, that means anything about medical history, anything about any family members who might suffer if you were to be deported. A couple of notes on that. Julie mentioned getting letters of support and getting people to write letters. It is very important to work with the lawyer and figuring out what the lawyer wants when it comes to letters of support as much as possible. For instance, a letter simply saying, I think this person is great, let him stay in the United States, that may not be as helpful as a letter that can explain, I've known this person for 10 years, this person is absolutely key to their family, here's a story about what that person did when his father or her mother was sick, or this is this is the reason why I think it would be very hard for the family if that person was deported. That's one of those times in which it might be useful to make sure that you can work with the lawyer to see what sort of letters and what needs to be written on them can actually be contained. So the other thing to do, and this is something, a point of emphasis, which is when you're getting ready to meet with a lawyer, try to bring as many documents as you can. Documents, documents, documents. Why? Well, it's not just because we love to see things on paper, and it's not because we don't trust people or their memory. It's usually because there are two reasons. One, we need to get small technical facts that may be important to your case, things that there is no reason for you to have remembered, or things in which could be easily misremembered, right? How many years did you spend in prison? Was it 4 years or 6 years? That has a huge difference on how a case can go out, even if you remembered it slightly differently. Second, and this is a part that I think does not get talked about and is unfortunate, but is absolutely true, which is these cases usually involve a lot of work. A lawyer deciding to take a case like this means that they know that there's going to be a lot of work that they need to do. And a lot of that work is not really in the context of doing research on legal cases and writing briefs, though that sometimes can be what they do. But a lot of the work on these cases is finding facts, finding documents, getting ways in which to use certain facts in someone's case that can then later on be useful in arguing for them. And so when that is true, a lawyer who sees a client or their family member come up with a lot of documents from the beginning, it can feel as if the lawyer understands that that they are not going to be alone, that they are not going to be the ones having to call people up constantly and saying, I need this, I need this, I need this, and instead can feel like that the client or their family members can really help with a lot of the frustrating aspects of the case, which can be a lot of factual investigation. All right, so I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that, but those are some things to remember when to do it. Here's some just making sure to really figure out whether or not you can trust a lawyer. One, lawyers that don't call you back or lawyers that don't communicate clearly to you, even if they're a great guy or great woman, that does not bode well. They need to be able to explain things clearly to you, even though this area of law is difficult to understand. Lawyers that make any guarantees. This is tough work. There is no guarantee. Even when there is a very strong case, no lawyer should be promising that they can definitely win. And yes, please check on more than one lawyer. Don't feel like you're going to offend a lawyer because you're going to ask for a second opinion. And if a lawyer does get offended for asking a second opinion, then that might be a good sign not to use that lawyer as well. Be realistic with each other. A good lawyer will try to make sure that the expectations won't be too high, because this is all very difficult, and it's not the lawyer who is going to be making the decisions that are ultimately going to decide your client's fate. Okay, thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Julie and Linus. I must say, I learned so much just in that short amount of time. And so I'm really excited about this toolkit and the information that you shared, because we know families are often overwhelmed, excuse me, and intimidated when you're dealing with these complex legal matters. And so, Linus, I really appreciate you saying this is hard work and it takes a lot of work to do, and that it's a relationship that needs to be built, because it really sets that foundation of a true expectation of what needs to happen in this process. And you guys are just amazing. So thank you so much for sharing that. And with that, in wonderful SEARAC fashion, we are going to have one more poll. I want to ask, do you know someone currently vulnerable to deportation? It's real simple, yes or no. Do you know someone who is currently vulnerable to deportation? All right, let's see what we have. I look at that, 73% of people who responded said yes. and 18% who aren't sure, and obviously another 9% who says no. And so for those of you who know someone who's currently vulnerable, or maybe you're the person, this toolkit hopefully can be a lot of help for you. And I'm hoping that what we shared today was really valuable and that can help you along this fight of deportation. All right, so what we want to do now is just really talk about how you can take action and what you can do to support these unjust deportations. While everyone's may not be fighting a deportation order or participating directly in a campaign, there are things that everyone can do to support this movement to end unjust deportation and detention. And the first thing is SEARAC, together with partners in the Southeast Asian American Deportation Defense Network, have launched a public statement to denounce deportations in the community. And so we're encouraging everyone to sign it and to share. And so we're going to be leaving this petition open. This is the link, and sharing it with lawmakers to demonstrate the community support to change our unjust immigration laws. And as Julie talked about, Jenny and Linus, about how important community support is when we're fighting these unjust laws. We also encourage everyone to call their members of Congress directly to issue public statements to denounce what's happening in the community. And so Representative Judy Chu of California and Representative Jayapal of Washington will soon be releasing a congressional sign-on directed at DHS, urging them to use their powers of discretion to prevent the deportation of Southeast Asian American refugees. And so call your representatives today and make sure that you can add your name to that letter, make sure that they add their name to that letter. And we're also currently looking for an office, a Senate office, to host a similar effort. And so we're definitely in DC looking for members of Congress who can support. And so if you can, call your senators today and see if they're willing to champion legislation for the Southeast Asian American community, and you can direct them to katrina@searac.org if they wish if they express interest. And we can't express enough how important it is to call your members of Congress and to push these offices to make the right decisions. And so now we're going to move to our Q&A portion. And so we're going to quickly just give you real quickly some logistics around this. There's a raise your hand icon. You can raise your hand and we're going to unmute your line. Remember to share your name, respect the viewpoints of others who's sharing, and if you could, keep your comments as brief as possible within 2 minutes so that we can hear from as many people as possible. And so we have a question. And the question is, you mentioned that folks have criminal convictions that make them deportable. Were their criminal convictions sentenced by U.S. courts or from courts in their home country?
Sure, I can answer this. Usually the scenario that we're seeing are people who have a crime in the United States. So they may have arrived here as a refugee, sometimes as young children, and then in the normal course of their time in the United States, they might have a criminal conviction that leads to their deportation proceedings and goes from there.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Julie?
I think that's good.
Another question we have is, do you have any referrals for lawyers?
So I feel like as a SEARAC board member, I'll put on that hat and say that I know that SEARAC has a list and is in the process of building a list of lawyers that take these types of cases. And you know, I feel like we have sort of our networks, NIP, NLG. We have a network of attorneys as well, and you can look at our website for the list of attorneys. Linus, any other suggestions? I think AILA was one on Linus's side. The AILA network is super, super strong, particularly in areas of the country that may have less resourcing at the local level. Any other suggestions, Linus, from your side?
No, but it really also depends on what you're looking for. If you will need a lawyer to get the old conviction vacated, then you really want to look at the criminal defense bar to see people who are familiar with the criminal procedures to get a conviction vacated. But yes, ALA is one really good one, and I would strongly suggest that. It's obviously going to be dependent a little bit on where you're at and geographically where you are at. But the other thing is too, don't be shy about calling multiple nonprofit agencies. Many of the nonprofits, even if they cannot take on your case, they might have suggestions for local private attorneys that are really good or experienced in the area.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. We have another question, and the person's asking, we currently live in Colorado, but my husband was ordered removed in California. Should we get a lawyer in California?
So that is a little bit tricky. You don't need to. The person can file what's called the motion to reopen in California if it never got appealed. If the case got appealed, then the motion to reopen would need to be filed in Virginia anyway. But I would generally say that logistically it might be best to try to find a lawyer in Colorado. However, there can be advantages to finding a lawyer who is familiar with the immigration court that you are asking relief for. So if, for instance, you were ordered removed from San Diego and there was a particular judge that ordered your removal, a lawyer from that local area might have more familiarity with how best to do that. But it really would depend a bit on logistics, on how comfortable you feel about working with a lawyer who's out of state versus working with a lawyer who you can actually physically meet up with.
Thank you. So I'm going to unmute one line. Someone was asking a question. I'm going to have you ask your question around getting a letter of removal and knowing the status of the individual. And I believe the person, is it Sayan?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've unmuted your line too. Yeah, feel free to ask your question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I know a few people that have a criminal past, but they don't know if they are on the removal list. So, and this is an old crime. And one of them, they actually, when they went to get their green card renewal, they actually got picked up. So is there a way to know if we're on that, if the person is on that list for removal?
Can I ask, what do you mean by a removal list? Like whether
Like
is it more like about
for deportation? Yeah.
I just want to say, like, there were a lot of Minnesota 8 folks who didn't even know that they were on a list for removal, but they did something like renew their green card or lost their green card and asked for another one, and that kind of flagged them to get picked up by ICE. So, but I don't know about the question, is there a list and how can you find out before you have to go and get a green card renewed or something?
Yeah. So I would say it's pretty hard to know whether you're on the list of individuals. I'm going to assume it's you might be referring to, sometimes they have a list of individuals that they're seeking travel documents from ICE and are intending perhaps to arrest at their next check-in, or trying to go to their house to seek their detention. And I think it's hard to know who's on that list. And oftentimes I think asking, the person asking about whether they're on the list could trigger them actually being put on the list. And so I think the way to sort of focus, deal with that uncertainty and the things you can't do to sort of minimize you being on that list or minimize the risk of you or someone being redetained is, to before making any sort of application to immigration court or seeking to renew a green card, whatever application or interaction might happen with the immigration agency, whether it be ICE or USCIS, consult with an attorney and perhaps multiple attorneys to figure out the right strategy. You know, sometimes people have criminal convictions, but they're actually not deportable, right? And so it might actually be safe to renew a green card. Sometimes people look at that criminal conviction and, you know, that person is not checking in at ICE. And yeah, it looks like it is a deportable crime, and it might not mix. It might be very high risk for them to seek renewal of their green card. So those are kind of a sample of the considerations. So definitely, you know, checking in, asking around for a good immigration attorney, you know, having a consultation or two and figuring out what's the best strategy before trying to make that contact.
Thank you.
Monica, we can't hear you.
Sorry, keep forgetting about that. Someone asked a question about getting a letter or template to ask my senator to host something, a similar effort to what Rep. Jayapal is doing. And so I'm going to refer this to Katrina at SEARAC.org. If you email Katrina, she can share more information with you about how that's going, and so what information you would need. So again, that's Katrina at SEARAC.org, and she can share that information with you. And so we're at time, and so I'm going to ask one last question. And it says, I heard that if ICE didn't pick you up after you're released from incarceration, then they don't have the authority to pick you up or in the process. And I guess someone's asking, is that true or not?
So that's a very interesting question, and it's actually one that the Supreme Court of the United States is going to be deciding soon. There was a recent argument about it, and it's not quite accurate to say that they can't pick you up. The question, it's more along the lines of, when they pick you up, can you ask for a bond? And so there's a little bit of confusion on that. So ICE can come and arrest you after you've been committed a crime and you're a non-citizen just about at any time. The question that the Supreme Court is deciding is, if they did not pick you up right away, can you ask for a bond in order to get released? And we'll see what the Supreme Court says. Right now, depending on where you are living, some states, some areas, ICE can come and get you, pick you up 20 years later, and still hold you without the ability to pay a bond right now. And then in some jurisdictions, if they come and pick you up, then they have to give you the right to have a bond hearing. And we'll find out soon, hopefully within the next few months, how the Supreme Court decides that case.
Thank you for that. So this is really the last question. I think this is the last one we have. And someone's asking, have you ever come across a stateless person? And that is someone who doesn't have citizenship in any country. And how does that play out when you're thinking about deportations and detentions?
Yes, it happens all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And in terms of how it plays out is the system can still order them removed, and then ICE has the ability to ask a bunch of countries whether or not they'll take them, and it usually means that the person is going to be detained for at least 90 days, and in some cases even longer, depending on the situation. But the stateless problem is actually much more widespread than people realize. A lot of people are stateless and end up in removal proceedings.
Yeah. And I would suggest, you know, there's different sort of definitions or categories of stateless folks. Like we used to see a lot of folks from formerly the USSR. And so one of the possible places that might be helpful in the toolkit is to look at our frequently asked questions about prolonged detention or detention for very, very long periods of time. Oftentimes this would happen to stateless folks. You know, people, the agency is trying to either resettle them somewhere or try to force one country to take the individual, and they end up spending quite some time in detention. And so there's certain legal strategies to contest that form of detention.
Wow. Thank you. That was new to me. I've never heard of that. And so wow, thank you so much for that information. And I hope for the person who's asking that question that it gave you some information that you're needing. So thank you, Julie and Jenny and Linus, so much for your wisdom, really, and your knowledge around this issue, and for the help that you're providing so many. And someone made a comment that says this information is so universal, because she's with the Hispanic community and, you know, working with another organization, and she sees how just universal this information is. So I think, you know, what you guys provided is beyond just helping the Southeast Asian American community, but it is really a solidarity toolkit. And so we, you know, really appreciate that. So before we go, I just want to share real quick that SEARAC is in the middle of a campaign, and many of you may have heard about public charge as we think about immigration. And I just want to share the information with you to hopefully support this campaign. And basically, public charge is a test to determine whether or not someone who is seeking to adjust their status, particularly in the U.S., which is what we're talking about, is likely to become reliant on government assistance for support. And so the Trump administration is seeking to expand their determination. Right now, there's only two public benefits that they look at, and they're seeking to expand this determination to include things like food stamps and housing assistance, emergency medical care. They're also looking to expand increase the income limit, how much income you would need to make, and also they're giving more ways to have immigration officers consider whether or not a person is a public charge, which means someone who has, you know, limited English could be negatively impacted, because they could say, hey, this person may not be able to get a job. And so again, this is another attack on the immigrant community, and SEARAC with our partners and community is pushing back, and we would love you to just text One Nation SEARAC to 52886. Pull your cell phones out real quick and text One Nation SEARAC to 52886 and let the administration know that we oppose this harmful regulation that will really impact our community and many immigrant communities. And again, this is a solidarity campaign where we're not just fighting for the Southeast Asian American community, but all communities that will be impacted by this proposal. So hopefully we can count on you for that. And in closing, thank you guys for going over with us just a little bit. So in closing, I just want to encourage everyone to make sure you're supporting, if you can, community members who are fighting detention and removal by organizing locally, if possible, and consider, you know, following the Minnesota 8 campaign, the Release Minnesota 8 campaign organizers, and the other organizations we have on the call, Julie and Linus, and make sure that you're following them. And if you need information, that you're able to kind of stay up to date with what is happening. And if you need any additional information, we have the email addresses here. Make sure you reach to Katrina@SEARAC.org if you need any information about what we're doing at the national level. And we will be certain to try to reach out to you and help support you in any way that we can. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Linus. And thank you, Jenny, so much for sharing with us and your courage and really your strong willpower in this fight. And so thank you, and we hope you guys have a great afternoon.
Bye, y'all.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.